Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Today we will be working on quadratics in vertex form. All right. Vertex form or quadratic is written here. All right. I'm gonna zoom in on the board for you a little bit later if you can't see this, and I'll let you copy that down. All right. Vertex form will be A. Open your parentheses, x minus h, close you that parentheses, raise it to the second power because it's a quadratic, right? Plus k on the outside of the parentheses. Now, here's what these values of a, h, and k represent. Now, a lets me know if my parabola is going to open upward or if my parabola is going to open downward. Now, if my a value is greater than 0, what type of numbers are greater than 0? Positive numbers, right? Positive numbers are the numbers that's greater than 0, right? If my a value is greater than 0, that means my parabola is going to open upward, right? It's going to open upward, all right? If my a value is less than 0, all right, what numbers are less than 0? Negative numbers, right? Negative numbers are less than 0. So if my a value is less than 0, right, that means my parabola is going to open downward. All right, it's going to open downward. Now, another thing that I can figure out if my quadratic is in vertex form is obviously the vertex, right? The h value inside the parentheses and the k value outside of the parentheses lets me know what my vertex is, right? So on the inside of the parentheses, it says x minus h, which means that whatever the value here is going to be the opposite for my vertex, right? So we'll be seeing that a little bit later on. All right, whatever the value on the outside is, whether it's positive or negative, it stays that same sign. So if I got a positive value out here, it'd be a positive y. If I got a negative value out here, it'd be a negative y value inside for my vertex. And if I know what the vertex is, the other thing we can find is the axis of symmetry, right? The axis of symmetry is always going to be my x value for my vertex. So if I know what the vertex is, I also know what my axis of symmetry is, right? And just like any other function that you work with, if you need to find the y-intercept, plug in 0, find the y-intercept. Now, once we have all these values, right, a parabola is symmetrical. That's why we have an axis of symmetry, which means that however many units one point is away from the axis of symmetry, we should have a point on the opposite side of that axis of symmetry for that parabola, right? And that's an easier way to graph. After I can count my units away from my axis of symmetry, I should be able to find another point on the opposite side. So if I got 3 units on one side, I count 3 units on the other side, right? That should be a true point for my parabola. All right, so the first problem that we want to work on today, right? Let you guys see the board, get a little bit closer to the board, right? This is all the stuff that we talked about just now, right? A times x minus h plus k, right? Lets me know if my parabola opens upward or downward. It lets me know what the vertex of my parabola is. It lets me know what my axis of symmetry is, right? And it lets me know if I plug in 0 for x, I find my y-intercept. Now, the problem that we'll have today, our first practice problem, is going to be 2 times x plus 1 squared minus 2. Right? That's going to be the first problem that we'll work on today. Right? So, the first thing we want to do, we want to find our vertex. Right? We want to find our vertex. This is vertex form. So, the first thing I should be able to do is plot my vertex. All right, so how do I plot my vertex? Well, it should be the h value, which is my x, and then it should be the k value, which is my y. Well, here we got x plus 1. Now, as I stated before, it's going to be the opposite. So if I got x plus 1, that means the x value for my vertex will be negative 1. All right, remember that. I know it's a little confusing, but remember, whatever the value inside the parentheses is, it's the opposite of that value. So I got a plus 1. Give me negative 1. All right, negative 1 for my x value. And here I have minus 2 on the outside. So for my y value, right, we have negative 2. So my vertex is negative 1, negative 2. We're going to plot that point right here. Go to the left 1 unit for negative 1 for my x. go down 2 units from my y. That gives me -1, -2, and we plot that point on our graph. Now, we can go ahead and find our axis of symmetry. What is my axis of symmetry? Well, my axis of symmetry is always going to be my x value in my vertex, right? So what all I need to do is I need to draw a dotted line through my vertex. Right, so now I have an axis of symmetry. So all I need to do is find points on either this side or this side in order to graph my parabola. Right, so here what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and make a quick table. Right, we're going to go ahead and find 0 and 1 because those numbers are to the right of my vertex. All we need to do is find 2 points to the right, which will give me 2 points on the left side. Right, and then we can graph our parabola. So here, I want to plug in 0, right? Plugging in 0 is going to give me my y-intercept. I plug in 0 for x, right? We work it out, right? Got to follow your order of operations, right? Plug in 0 for x. Inside my parentheses, we got 0 plus 1. All right, 0 plus 1 gives me 1. Right, then we got to do our exponents. Remember, parentheses and then exponents. 1 squared, that gives me 1. Then multiplication and division. Well, we got 2 times 1, so we'll multiply 2 times 1. That's going to give me 2. And then addition and subtraction, 2 minus 2, that gives me 0. So the point that we found when I plug in 0 for x is 0 for y, so we get 0, 0, right? Which is the origin. So we go to the origin, we plot our point at 0, 0. Then we're going to find when x is 1. All right, we plug in 1 for x. We get 1 plus 1. All right, what's 1 plus 1? All right, 2, right? Simple. All right, that's inside the parentheses. Not that it's addition, it's inside the parentheses, so we must do it first. All right, and then we have an exponent. So we don't go 2 times 2 and get 4 and then squared. No, we go 2 squared because we got to do the exponent only applying to that 2. 2 squared gives me 4. All right, now we do our multiplication. 2 times 4 gives me 8. Then 8 minus 2 gives me 6. So when my x value is 1, my y value is 6, which gives me the point 1, 6. Now, I got a point on this side, 0, 0, which is exactly 1 unit away from my axis of symmetry. Well, because it's 1 unit away from my axis of symmetry, that means I need to have another point on the opposite side that's 1 unit away from my axis of symmetry. All right, so I'll move over 1 unit from the axis of symmetry, and I have a point at -2, 0. Right, I can plot that point at -2, 0, and then I have a point at 1, 6, which means I move 1 unit to the right, 6 units up. That point is 2 units away from my axis of symmetry. Since that's 2 units away from my axis of symmetry, that means I should have another point that's exactly 2 units away from my axis of symmetry on the opposite side, right? So we move over 1 unit, 2 units, which is at -3, +6. Right, now we have 5 points. -3, +6, -2, 0, -1, -2, 0, 0, 1, 6. Right, we can draw our parabola through that, and this is what we have now. If you need time to write this down, right, you can make sure you pause this video at any point so you can copy down the screen. All right, I'm going to start another problem for us. right, so our second problem that we have f of x equals negative. We open our parentheses. We got x minus 1 on the inside, raised to the second power plus 1. All right, this is our second problem that we're having. So once again, the first thing we want to do is we want to find our vertex, right? So we want to use the opposite number inside of my parentheses. So inside of my parentheses, we have negative 1. What's the opposite of negative 1? All right, positive 1, right? That gives me my x value for my vertex. And then on the outside, we want to use the value for k. On the outside, k is positive 1, so that means my y value is going to be positive 1, all right? That gives me my vertex. All right, that gives me my vertex. My vertex is at positive 1, positive 1. So if we start at the origin, we move to the right 1 unit, we move up 1 unit, that gives me my vertex. Right now, the second thing we can figure out is what is my axis of symmetry? Well, my axis of symmetry has to be whatever my x value is for my vertex. So we're going to plug in that, which will give me x equals a positive 1, right? So now we have our axis of symmetry, and we can go ahead and put our axis of symmetry, go ahead and draw our axis of symmetry line through our vertex. All right, remember that vertex is 1, 1. Now, we can go ahead and find our y-intercept by plugging in 0 for x, right? We can go ahead and plug in that 0 for x. Go ahead and work that problem out. Now, here's a little thing that's different. Right? We got a negative sign in front of my parentheses, which means that my a value is less than 0. Now, if my a value is less than 0, that lets me know that my parabola should be opening downward. So when we start plotting these points, we need to make sure that it's opening downward. All right, we need to make sure that it's opening downward. So here we're going to plug in 0 for x. All right, that's going to give me negative 1 squared plus 1. All right, remember, negative 1 squared is not negative 1 because it's negative 1 times negative 1, which gives me a positive 1. Right, but we got a negative on the outside, which turns that into a negative 1, which gives me negative 1 plus 1, which is 0. So when I plug in 0 for x, we get 0 for y again, right? That's not going to always be the case. It just so happens to be the case in these two problems. So again, we have our y-intercept at the origin, which is 0, 0. Instead of doing 1, we already know the value for 1. We can plug in negative 1 for x. All right, plug in negative 1 for x because we need to use 2 points in order to find the other 2 points on the opposite side. So we go negative 1 minus 1, right? Make sure you know your signs. Keep it, change it. Right, that's going to give me negative 2 squared plus 1. Negative 2 squared is going to give me a positive 4. All right, that gives me. So now we have negative 2 squared, right, gave me a positive 4 in my parentheses. But remember, on the outside of my parentheses, we still have a negative sign, which means we have negative 4 plus 1, which gives me a negative 3. So we can go ahead and plot that point, right? When x is negative 1, y will be negative 3, which is down here. Now we have 2 points on the left side of my graph. Right, now we can plot the 2 points on the right side of the graph, right? So from here, this is 1 unit away. So we'll have another one that's 1 unit away, which would be 2, 0. This point here, which is negative 1, negative 3, is 2 units away. So we can move 2 units away this direction, and that's going to give me 3, negative 3. All right, we plot this point. And now we have 5 points for my parabola. We can just draw through those points. Right, and now we have our parabola. Right, I'm gonna go ahead and zoom in on the board for you guys if you need to copy that down. All right, if you need to pause right here in the video in order to write these things down, you can go ahead and pause right there. If I erase too fast, all right, all you can do is just go back in the video and pause it on the board so you can copy down that work, right? You just go back in the video and pause it at that point. All right, so now what we want to look at, right? This is our first problem that we worked on, our first example, where we grafted 2 times x plus 1 squared minus 2, right? This is that first parabola that we graphed at the beginning, earlier in the video, all right? So what we want to learn now is we know how to find our vertex, we know how to find our axis of symmetry, we know how to figure out if it's opening upward or downward. Now what we want to do is we want to learn these characteristics of our parabola. All right, so what do I mean by the characteristics? I want to know when it's increasing, right? When it's decreasing. I want to know my range and my domain. So let's start with domain, right? Usually, more often than not, our domain represents, usually all real numbers for our function, right? So in this situation, we want to figure out what values can we use for x. So any value that you can use for x will be included in our domain. Well, we don't have any restrictions, mainly because we don't have an asymptote, so we don't have any restrictions, so, or holes in our parabola. So all the way from negative infinity, which is far left, all the way to positive infinity, which is far right, which includes all my real numbers. So the domain, right, for my parabola would be all real numbers, right? So x will be all real numbers. That's anything that I can include for my x value. Now, what we need to figure out is my range, right? What is my range? Now, my range would be whatever my y values are. Now remember, if my domain is my x values, that means my range is my y value. So how do I figure out what my domain is? Now, I want to figure out, is it opening upward or is it opening downward, right? Well, I see that my parabola is opening upward. Also, I would have known my parabola was opening upward if I just look at my a value, which is positive, which lets me know that it opens upward. Now, this means that my y value is going to be greater than whatever my minimum is, right? And remember, my minimum here is my vertex. That's the lowest point on my graph. So what is the y value at that minimum? Well, right here it's -2, right? That point is -1, -2, which means that my range will go from -2 all the way up to the top. Now, up to the top would be all the way to infinity. So my range value would be from 2 to positive infinity. From 2 to positive infinity. That would be my range value. All right. And when we want to say all real numbers, all right, that would be from negative infinity to positive infinity. My range would be from -2 all the way up to positive infinity. Right? From -2 to positive infinity. Now, when is my graph increasing or when is it decreasing? Now, how do I figure out when it's increasing? Now, you read this like a book. You want to read this like a book, and we're going to make an interval over when it's increasing. So as I move from left to right, as I move from left to right, right, what is happening to my graph? Now, granted, I know my end behavior. I know that both sides of my graph looks like they're going up. But remember, we're reading this from left to right. So as I read from left to right, as I go from negative infinity and as I move this direction, when I get to my graph, what is originally happening to my graph? As I go this way, my graph starts to go down. Right? So from negative infinity to a certain point, my graph is going to continue to go down. And that point on my x-axis is going to be at -1. As I move from negative infinity to -1, my graph would be decreasing. My graph is going to be decreasing. Now, the sun coming up. As I continue to move to the right from -1, my graph stops decreasing and starts to increase. And it's going to continue to increase to positive infinity. It's going to continue to increase all the way up to positive infinity. So this is how we read our parabola. Right? We're always reading it from left to right. So if my parabola opens downward as I move from left to right, which we're going to do in a second, right? That means that my parabola will be increasing until the vertex. and then after the vertex, it would begin on its decline. All right, if you need to copy this down, you know what to do. Pause the video. All right, copy the work. All right, and then for our second example, what we had negative x minus 1 squared plus 1, right? Where our vertex was positive 1, and we noticed that our parabola should be opening downward, right? So now what we want to do, the first thing is find our range. We know what our domain is. Our domain continues to be the same for parabolas, which will be all real numbers, right? It'll be all real numbers. All right, so for my range, right, it's opening downward, right, which means my y values will be less than whatever my vertex y value is. Remember, my vertex y value is a positive 1, right, because I already know here I found my vertex, which was 1, 1. So that means the y value for my vertex is going to be 1, which means that my range will go from a positive 1 from negative infinity, to positive 1. Right? Another way we can write this is y is less than or equal to positive 1. Right. That'll be my range value. Now, when is it increasing? Now, as I move from left to right, remember, as I move from left to right, as I get here, what's happening to my graph? Right, we know that from the vertex, they both end going downward. But as I move from left to right, what's happening to my parabola? Well, my parabola starts to work upward. All right, so when is it working upward? It is increasing over my interval from negative infinity up to positive 1. That's when it's increasing. Right? So when is it decreasing? Well, after I get to positive 1 on my x-axis, right, it starts to go down then. And then from that point, it will be decreasing from 1 to positive infinity. And those are my characteristics, right? We already know how to find our range. We already know how to find our y-intercept. We should know how to find our x-intercepts after we plot our points. So for your assignment, what I'm going to be asking you guys to do, I'm going to be asking you guys to find your domain, your range. Let me know over the intervals where it's increasing and decreasing, and obviously give me your vertex and your axis of symmetry. And then I need you to graph it as well, all right? You're going to have 2 problems to do, all right? If you need to copy this down, go ahead and pause the video at this moment and copy this down. For my students, y'all know Miss Delatory not here, so I ain't got that pretty handwriting, so you'll be okay. Alright, so here are your two quadratics. Alright, and what I want you guys to find. Alright, we're going to do -2 times x minus 1 to the second power minus 1. And we'll do x plus 1 squared plus 2. Alright, I want you to find the vertex, the axis of symmetry, the domain, the range, and whether it's increasing, not whether, but the increasing and decreasing intervals, right? So your increasing and decreasing intervals should look like this, right? And your range and your domain should look like this. All right, you know the drill. If you have any questions, please give me a call. Everybody should have my number. If you don't have my number, please go to your Google Classroom. All right, go to your Google Classroom and let me know if you don't have my number. Again, I appreciate you guys for watching the video. Please make sure you take care of this work. Turn it in. I know Edgenuity is a little hard. I know some of you guys are having a hard time logging in, but I know y'all watch YouTube videos because you watch them when you sit in my class sometimes. So I know you can get to YouTube, at least from your phone, so you can turn in these assignments and supplement of the Edgenuity work whenever we guys can get you your laptops. Again, I hope you guys are staying safe. I hope you guys are staying healthy. I'm sorry that we have to teach this way, but I'm here for you. If you need me, just give me a call, an email, a text, or anything. I hope you guys are safe. Hope your families are safe. And I'll be praying for y'all. Y'all take care. Have a good day. Bye.